Hello everyone and welcome to Cinderful Gaming. I hope you're all doing well, I hope you're all staying safe, and most of all, I hope you're all fighting that war against the Grey. Today's video, we're going to be talking about getting started with various different armies from Warhammer Age of Sigmar. We did a video not too long ago talking about the best and worst armies, and everyone asked us to talk about all the armies in Warhammer Age of Sigmar, so that's what we've been doing. We've been going through talking about all the armies. We've done videos for all the different Grand Alliances within Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and today's video we're going to be tackling the Order Grand Alliance. However, we've got one thing with this, because Order has by far the most allegiances within its single Grand Alliance. We've split Order up into Order Edition, and we will have the Elf Edition out at its later point as well. So with that said, let's get cracking on. We'll check out the criteria we've used for what armies we think are better and or worse, or points we think make for a better or worse army to get started with in Warhammer Age of Sigmar for this, and then we'll move into talking about the Order armies, excluding all the pointy-eared elves. And so here we have our criteria for what makes a great starting army in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. First of all, that army has to have a Star Collecting Box or a similar ease of point of entry. This could be a starter set, or around certain times of the year you may see Battle Force boxes come out around Christmas, or you have the dual boxes and launch boxes that come out with various releases, although most of these are limited run only, so that in itself is an issue. This will chop and change depending on whether those boxes are out or not. But Star Collecting Boxes and the new Vanguard boxes are part of the core range and are easy ways to get into armies. We want to make sure that armies are not massive with their model count. This is really important because there is something to be said in having so much quantity of models can really make it daunting for other parts of the hobby, like painting. The cost of the army obviously changes as well. If your army has lots of models, it's going to cost lots of money. That comes without saying, but generally you will find that your troops will come cheaper than your more elite, so it does sort of balance out in that way, but generally really elite armies will most of the time be quite cheaper than horde armies. You do have, I guess, a lack of summoning is what you want from armies. The more summoning you have, the more models you need to buy, the more additional stuff you need to buy for the army. This of course racks up our cost and makes our painting harder because we get more quantity to have to paint through. We want to make sure an army is easy and friendly to paint for a starter as well. If your army has got really highly detailed, intricate models, you're going to have to learn a lot more with your basic painting if you're first getting into the hobby, where other armies that maybe require more basic techniques like dry brushing and washing and using contrast are much easier to get into the game with. We want the army to be able to be played in multiple ways as well, so this doesn't necessarily mean it has to have lots of models, but you have to have lots of ways to use said models. Of course, having the ability to change into other models is also great as well. This of course leads into ease of play, where we want the army to be easy to play. We don't want a lot of special rules. We don't want a lot of special rules that also are hard to keep track of, things like tokens and all that stuff that are required, extra stuff on top of we already need for a new player to get into and not really want them to worry about them. Competitiveness, while not, I guess, essential, is certainly something you want to know about for when getting into a new army and a new game, because you don't want your first army to not be what you think it is. If all your friends are playing top tier competitive armies and you go and grab an army that's not top tier competitive and maybe one of the weaker armies in the game, you might find it harder to win your games, and you need to understand where your army fits in that meta so you don't get a bad experience from this. With that said, let's get cracking on into the armies. And so, starting off the list, we have Cities of Sigmar. Cities of Sigmar are an interesting one, as they have many points going for them and many against them as well. For starters, their Star Collecting Boxes are actually pretty good, though they are rather light on points. You're wanting to pick up a couple of them, but you can freely mix the two Star Collecting Boxes for the army. What's even better is you get dual kits within these boxes to further differentiate between them. So you can definitely pick up multiple of the Anvil Guard. You get the option of building Charybdis or War Hydra out of the monster kit, and the Chariot has two options as well. Meanwhile, in the Star Collecting Box for Greywater Fastness, we of course have the Gyrocopter Gyro Bomber kit, and you can build either the Iron Drakes or Iron Breakers out of the Dwarven Infantry kit in that box set, so some really cool options there. Model count for Cities of Sigmar, for the most part, is going to be very heavy on models. You are going to be playing with 50 plus models in most of your games with Cities of Sigmar. Even the more elite armies of Cities of Sigmar will put quite a few models down, but there are options to play with all monster armies, all steam tank armies, and indeed all cavalry armies as well. So you do have those options, but the majority of Cities of Sigmar armies will focus heavily on having lots of infantry on the ground. This, of course, may affect the cost in certain instances, but because a lot of the kits are older kits, they can be relatively cheaper to buy than some of the other kits in the game. So you can find the cost of the army while buying lots of models. It doesn't necessarily rack up too high much more rather than the average army. The lack of summoning definitely helps with this, as the army generally doesn't summon unless you're going into some weird builds with Living City, bringing in some summoning from your Sylvaneth allies. You're not going to bring a lot of summoning to the table. Painting skills for cities is really interesting and really rewarding. You get a lot of various different kits to build that don't have very similar aesthetics to them, but a uniting colour scheme can make them really fun. And this is where the painting of cities comes into it. You're going to have to find ways to bring those units that maybe don't look similar together under a unified colour scheme or a unified sort of pattern. And that's maybe the issue where cities come. They do have some really fantastic monsters which can get painted up really quickly. Things like the War Hydra, Charybdis, and Griffin all paint up really quickly, as do the Phoenixes. The army, probably more than any other army in the game, has a multitude of different ways to play. At current, you have 7 cities within the core Cities of Sigmar book, not to mention all the ones that were added from Broken Realms, which another 4 cities were added to over the course of the Broken Realms saga throughout the end of 2nd edition. So in total you have 11 different sub-factions to play from, which is just absolutely amazing. What's cool is you can change up your models to play in different sub-factions, or you can play with your same models in multiple of the different sub-factions. There's only one of the sub-factions that's actually really restrictive on what you can take within the army, but most of them will allow you to take absolutely anything you want. Ease of play is an issue with Cities of Sigmar, and I guess one of the issues of ease of play also comes with the ease of buying, is that a lot of their stuff that you're going to want is online order only, so this is definitely a mark against the faction. Ease of play, Cities of Sigmar does lead you down various different paths, though with a multitude of different units there are a lot of traps within the force that you can buy units that maybe don't fill the role you want them to properly. Competitiveness, Cities is so wide that it's always going to be an army that has options to play in a competitive meta, so this is really the good thing about Cities. Such a wide book, you're always going to have options. Next we have the Fyreslayers. So starting off, we've got a good star collecting box for the army. That doesn't include maybe the more mainstay unit in the Hearthguard Berserkers that we're wanting to pick up for the army, but we do get the Magmadroth kit, and there are some definite builds in there with the Magmadroths and Volkite Berserkers for the army. Model count for the army can be relatively low. You can play very heavy Magmadroth, and even when taking your more elite units, you're not going to be spending an awful lot of money getting too many models, though your elite unit kits are among the more expensive kits in the game, so this could be an issue if you're wanting to go and run a more elite heavy hitting army and run lots of those models. The cost can rack up there. Model count, as mentioned, like, you're never going to get into the massive hordes, but you are a horde army at times. So this means you're going to have a lot of models. You're probably going to be hitting around that 50-60 model range if you go all horde with your fire slaying dwarves here. The lack of summoning is a great bonus. You don't have to pick up any summoning, so once again, a fantastic thing for the army. And the painting for this army can be quite easy. Large areas of skin and scales means that contrast and dry brushing techniques work really, really well on the force as a whole. The multiple ways to play perhaps is quite limiting, as the range of the models here is really, really limited. You only have 3 different kits, or 3 different units rather, really, with your main force, but a lot of different characters, and the Magmadroth has some options as well, but you are lacking in kits to give you many very different ways of playing. Ease of playing is perhaps a little bit difficult. You've got very few kits, so you need to find out tactics and strategies to work with a very limited amount of models, so this can be an issue for the Fyreslayer army as well. And lastly, competitiveness. Fyreslayers sit somewhere around the middle. They've got the tools to win games, but they do lack a bit of, I guess, the breadth that other tomes can do, so sometimes they do struggle. So a good, solid, middling tier army is what Fyreslayers are. Next we have the Kharadron Overlords. They do have their own star collecting box, which gives you a bunch of good miniatures to start off your force with, and of course gives you that airship to start off with as well, because while you're playing Kharadron Overlords, you want those cool airships. The model count for Kharadron Overlords is pretty light. You're generally going to have airships and some supporting troops, and the airships take up a decent chunk of your points, so you're not going to have too many models. This army generally isn't going to cost an awful lot. It's probably a middle of the range army. The airships can be a little bit expensive in some instances, but you're not going to have an awful lot of them unless you're going in an all airship army. We've got a video on the channel talking about that all airship army if that's something you'd like to do, but you definitely can play around with how you're spending your money in this army, and you've got lots of options, and the star collecting box really does help cheapen up the core part of your force. No summoning in the army is another great thing. This means that you're not having to spend money on additional troops that aren't going to start the table and maybe not see the battle. And painting for the army is probably where the biggest hit is. The army has a really big barrier of entry with painting. It's got a lot of detail and a lot of models across the army, so you're definitely going to want to learn some really good painting techniques and really practice your painting on some of your troops in the army before you tackle some of the more intricate stuff like your airships and your more elite options for the force. The army does have multiple ways to play though. It can definitely play as a combat force, though maybe not its most competitive build. You can play with an all-airship army if you really want to, and you can play with a more sort of drive-by shooting style army where you've got troops inside your airships moving around. You can also play more infantry style as well if you want. So you do have multiple ways to play, but the army does generally play really well when it's in airships moving around. Ease of play is an issue with the army. The general style of KO is playing a very different game to a lot of other armies in Warhammer Age of Sigmar, so this does raise the ceiling and raise the floor of where you are trying to play with this army, because you're not playing like a lot of other armies in the game. This can lead to both good and bad responses from you and your opponents, as you may find getting caught by combat armies really hurts, or sometimes you may shoot other armies off the table before they even get a turn to play. Competitiveness, KO fit somewhere around the middle. They have definite counters within the meta, and they maybe struggle a little bit with a lack of mortal wound output in this current edition, though they do have some cool rend across the army, though not a lot of really high-end rend to get rid of some of those bigger creatures in the game. They're an army that's definitely a fun place to start, but probably not one of the best ones for starters, but don't let that tell you. If you love the models, take all this as warnings and go grab yourself some Sky-faring Sky Pirate Dwarves. Next, we have the Seraphon. So, for starters, they've got great start collecting boxes for the force. In fact, they have two of them, one start collecting Seraphon and one start collecting Skinks. This makes for a really easy way to get into the army, as you can freely mix these two to build whatever sort of army you want. Model count for Seraphon can be a bit swingy. You can play more horde-style armies. Generally, this will be an issue with playing the Starborn-style part of the force, but even the Coalesced playing Saurus-heavy armies can be a little bit more models, but generally not too extreme there. Cost of the army is not terrible. Most of these units are a little bit older, so they don't cost awful much. Even your big monsters aren't the most costly of anything. And then the issue with the army is one half of it has some summoning mechanics, so you're going to need to spend some point and some cash on getting some summoning units on the table for you. So this is one of the issues. However, the fact that the Coalesced, the other side of the Seraphon, don't require any summoning units is a good thing, because it means you can start with an army of Coalesced, not require summoning units, and grab your summoning units later. So it sort of counteracts each other with that one. Painting skills for Seraphon, this is really easy. Seraphon do not require an awful lot of advanced painting techniques. Some of the more character models are certainly more detailed and might take a bit more time, but dry brushing, thanks to all the scales and everything, just comes up so nicely. Contrast paint as your base, a dry brush over the top on all those scales, and you've got a fantastic looking army with some very, very minimal effort. The army does have multiple ways to play. As we mentioned, you've already got the Starborn and Coalesced, one which is summoning, one which is not. The Coalesced are much more tough, the Starborn are much more maneuverable, and then each of those particular types of Seraphon has two distinct flavors of it as well. You've got the Saurus and the monster-heavy versions of Coalesced, and then you've got the Skink and the more magic-focused versions of the Coalesced. So you've definitely got multiple ways to play around with this force, which is really great. And you can swing and move around how you want with these two forces, sort of gradually getting into one or the other. Though we do recommend, if you're getting started, play Coalesced first. Ease of play, the army does get you into parts of the army really easily. The sub-factions are really good at showing you exactly what to do with those particular sub-factions, and Coalesced is by far much more straightforward because you're not requiring to learn about summoning and all the rules involved with that and maneuvering like you are with Starborn. So definitely the Coalesced half of the army is fantastic for starting. Lastly, competitiveness is the last thing we want to talk about here for the army, and Seraphon at the moment is really super competitive. Doesn't matter what style of army it is for Seraphon, you're going to have a good day. Even the weaker builds of Seraphon are still solid armies sitting around the middle of the field, so you've got a good solid force that's easy to paint, easy to collect thanks to great start collecting boxes, and good on the tabletop. Lastly, we have the Stormcast Eternals, a fantastic starter army. Not because they are the poster boys of the game, but we do have multiple different start collecting boxes available for them, including them being in the Warhammer Age of Sigmar starter set. So there's just a great bunch of ways to get some models at a really cheap discount. Also, if you're lucky enough, you may have had the Mortal Realms magazines going around, and you may be able to find some of them at a cheaper cost to get you into the army a little bit cheaper as well. Model count for Stormcast is pretty light. Even if you go and bring in some coalition units from Cities of Sigmar in the Stormkeep armies, you're not going to find yourself really going over that 50 model mark with many different Stormcast Eternal lists. Many of the lists will actually fall very shy of that 50 model mark, so you've got a lot of easy numbers to paint here. The cost of the army, thanks to all the star collecting box and thanks to being more elite, is definitely going to drop. You're not going to have that many models that you need to buy for the force. A lack of summoning increases this ability to not have to spend too much money on the army because you're not having to bring extra stuff to the table. Painting skills for the army as well are really good because they've got large flat surfaces of armor. They take color, or whether big blocks of like your normal sort of colors like reds and blues, or big blocks of metallics like golds and silvers really nicely either way. They've got really nice clean lines and clean sort of cloaks, so all of it comes up really nicely with some nice vibrant paints and basic techniques. The army has a bunch of multiple different ways to play, with nearly every subfaction giving you something unique and taking different versions of units in different ways as well, and also giving you loads of different battle line options depending on what subfaction you play. This leads into our ease of play talk for the Stormcast as well, because the army really does sort of instruct you down to go. You want to play with Paladins, Knights Excelsior, and then add the Holy Command that targets Paladins. It all sort of builds together really well. You can see what the subfaction is trying to make you do by what it unlocks as battle line and the abilities it gives you, and match this with other things throughout the army, which really just gives a really seamless sort of way to build your army and then play with it on the tabletop. Lastly, competitiveness. Stormcast are a relatively new book, but they are doing really well competitively. With a wide range of model units available to the army, and some more easy to use than others, you're always going to see ups and downs in how Stormcast perform within the meta. Also, because they are a starter box army, they're always going to drop and go up. You'll see lots of people winning with them, and there'll probably be people who've been playing with longer or have picked the better lists. The same with, you'll see people sort of maybe not doing as well because they're either newer to the army or they've not picked the most top tier competitive lists in the book. So you're going to have this up and down with Stormcast at all times in the competitive meta. Well, that's the end of the video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And while you're at it, drop us a comment below in the comment section and let us know what you enjoyed about the video. If you'd like to come chat more with me and other members of our fine little community here at Cinderful Gaming, you can do so by following the link in the video's description to our Discord server. Lastly, we'd like to give a shout out to everyone who supports the channel via Patreon and YouTube members, and you can go help support the channel via Patreon and YouTube members as well and get access to, if you're a YouTube member, some of our awesome little gifts, or get choice of what we're going to do for content on the channel. You can follow those links in the description of the video to Patreon and YouTube members. But a shout out to them all, our Patreons: Christian Weir, James Soren, Greenskins Gaming, AJC, Kenny Lyle, Outer and Shot First, Andrew Bowen, Nathan Fee, The Rising Ape, Q Dynamic, Agu, Anthony B, Anton Nilsson, JJ Austrian, Average Wargamer, Domir, Mark Harvey, and James Cater. And to our YouTube members as well, a special shout out to Green Roots Gaming, Kenton Young, Chris Wallace, Aronya, Vinny, Lockloric, The Johnny84, David Ellsworth, Revenar, Wolfric Nick, and Broken Chef. Lastly, I'd like to give a special shout out first of all to Lady Witchvox Art, who does all the amazing artwork for the channel that you see here, and to Xmorphic, who does all the amazing work and the background work for our Discord server. Thank you both very much for all your help. That's it for today though, everyone. Stay safe, stay well, and most of all, keep fighting that war against the Grey. Ciao for now.